Hello, 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 New Haven, and welcome back to Arts Respond on WNHHLP 103.5 FM. New Haven Arts Respond is a collaboration with the Arts Council of Greater New Haven, which is my employer. I'm your host, Lucy Gellman, and today I am so excited to be here with Crystal R. Emery, who wears a lot of hats in and beyond New Haven. Not only are you like a writer and director and comedian, an artist and public health advocate, but I can I just say Renaissance woman? Is that fair, Crystal?
Go
So,
ahead.
and we are talking about your upcoming stand-up comedy show at Bergamos Community Theater, which is on April 5th. That's a Saturday at 7 p.m. So welcome. Just welcome to Arts Respond. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm glad to be here. And I'm glad you're back.
I am. So I want to talk about this show and your inspiration behind this show, and of course the irony that's in the title, which you've talked a little bit about. Um, but I also want to, yeah, let's talk about that. What inspired you to go into comedy?
I'm not sure if the truth is that interesting. All my life people say, "Oh, you're so funny." And I don't like comedy, right? I don't like comedians. It's very few that I've ever seen that could make me laugh. So it's ironic that I started working with a young man and he loves comedy, right? I mean, loves comedy. And so we went to a few comedy shows and I was like, Eck, oh my God, this is terrible. Don't do this to me. So for Christmas 2024, I bought him tickets to Michelle Buteau. And the show was January 21st. So we go down to Brooklyn and he raises his hand. Well, a year ago, I closed my company, URU the Right to Me. And I was wondering, what am I going to do? I faced a lot of health challenges. And so it's not like I'm going to direct a feature film or going on the road with a STEM project, right? Like right now, I'm trying to just breathe, right? Because I didn't have a ventilator before. So we go to Brooklyn to see Michelle Buteau, and she's hilarious, right? And I tell her, raise your hand, raise your hand. I tell him. And there's an audience of over 400 people. And he raises his hand, and she picks him, right? And he's like, what are you going to say? And I say, I want to do stand up, but I can't stand up. She says, come back tomorrow. I'll give you 5 minutes. And I'm like, oh, is this real? Wait a minute, did she just say that? So we waited till after the show. And she said, if you were bold enough to say, I want to do stand up, but I can't stand up, you're a comedian. And the rest is history.
And for you, like so I know that comedians, they write their material, they practice their material. For you, I feel like there are sort of two approaches to life, and you're capturing that. There is the approach where you sort of recognize the like uh, the the hardships that life has thrown at you, but also in some ways like the way in which they are inherently funny because of massive system failures, and some folks are able to talk about that in a way that is like funny and also very cheeky. And then folks who just have no humor about the whole thing. And I feel like you are choosing this first path. And so tell me about working on material and that process, how it's been for you.
You know, Lizzie, I never do anything the traditional route, right? Like, my life is just upside down. I study under a spiritual teacher in New Rochelle. And I used to ask her, why have I had so many experiences? Like I've had enough experiences for 20 people, right? And I write down some of them. Like some things have been so terrible that in writing them, there was always a funny one, right? And I'll give you an example, if you don't mind. Can I give you an example?
Yes, please. I love that.
Okay. I was in Griffin Hospital, and then they sent me to a rehab, right? In Shelton, Connecticut. So I go there, and it is the day before 4th of July, right? So there's nobody around, right? And I was just totally freaked out, right? Like, I was like, do they really expect me to stay here? They didn't have the required equipment to change my wound. They only had one nurse that could do it. Now, again, this is a rehab facility. I guess you're not supposed to name names, right?
I think you can name names. I mean, it's
Okay.
also like when we're talking about failures of the American healthcare system, I think it's okay to name names. They're big
Well,
corporations. It can
good.
be
But
fine.
the other thing is, this is filed by the police department. So if anybody wants to fact check, it's all documented. So, I'm there and I'm being Crystal. And I'm just like having a nurse right now, right? Because I've never been in a nursing rehab facility before. They have these really bad disorders and just all this craziness. And a nurse comes in and she describes who she is. And she started talking about her ethnic background, right? And she very specifically talked about being Italian. And this is important later on in the story. So she was sort of edgy, but she couldn't change the wound. And she leaves. And the aide with me is a very, very quiet person. And they felt uncomfortable leaving me there because I felt really uncomfortable. So the nurse leaves, and there's this thing on the floor. Now, I'm totally OCD neat, right? And so is he. So he goes to pick it up, and it wasn't on the floor before the nurse came. So I said, what is that? And I said, let's open it. And inside this envelope was a little jewelry baggie with cocaine. So he says, that's thrown away. I'm like, I'm not throwing this away. Are you kidding? This came off of that nurse. This nurse who's in charge of all these people, like, just had a bag of cocaine drop out of her pocket. So the next morning, I leave. I call home. I tell my brother to come get me. And the people at the facility are like, what's the matter? Why are you leaving? I'm like, I gotta get out of here. All right. So I get home and I call the Gellman police. Right? And I say, I want to report what just happened to me. I explained. The guy said, lady, we have better things to do than to respond to a disgruntled patient. And he hangs up the phone. I'm like, what the hell? Right? Because my feeling was this lady is taking care of sick people who maybe cannot verbalize on their own behalf. And who is going to believe this? So I live in Hampton. So I called the Hampton police, I called a detective that had been familiar with me because a former staff person had stolen my credit cards while I was in the hospital and charged $150,000. So the detective that I called, he was very familiar with me. So he said, Krista, it's out of our jurisdiction. And I explained my concern was this is somebody that is in charge of other people's care. He said, Crystal, because it's you, I'll come take it off your hands. Well, one of the things he told me was the moment that I picked it up, it became my possession, right? So because, and he gets in, 20 minutes later, he called and says, that's cocaine. Then he calls the Shelton police. Now they want to have a conversation, right? When I called, they hung up on me. But now they want to have a conversation. And they come out to the house. That story was so scary that I had to write it down. Because, you know, everybody has a darkness or a secret or addiction. But when you bring that to work, and I left this out. She came back in the room that night, right? Looking around everywhere. And I was like, what are you looking for? And she said, oh, I think I dropped something. I said, no. You got the wrong room. When the police came, they said, are you sure? So I described what she looked like. And I said, she's Italian. And they said, well, how do you know that? And, you know, they were really funky about it. And I said, because she spent part of the time explaining to me that she was Italian. So you go find the nurse of this name, and that's Italian, and that is the lady. Lucy, you gotta take a negative like that, right? After you think about it and try to find the humor in it. So my humor was not about the nurse, but more about the police station, right? Because the guy was like, I'm not taking a complaint from a disgruntled patient. Like, what the hell is a disgruntled patient?
Yeah, and I do feel like there are comedians increasingly who find humor in like broken systems. Is that one of the places that you like, because there are so many, I think, parts of the, especially now, of like the fabric of American like healthcare and transportation and just how we look out for each other and funding, like all these things. And they're deeply, deeply broken in a way that is actually quite tragic. Also, the justice system, which is more often, I think, an injustice system. Um, and and so how, for you, how do you find the humor in those things? Do you sort of sometimes I say like you laugh because the alternative is like crying or screaming or I don't know, like punching a wall.
You do all of those. You do all of those. For me, the humor was the police. Whether it was the Gellman police who were just so rude, or the Hampton police, right? Which the guy was like, okay, Crystal, we know you, we know that, you're probably telling the truth. Let me just come out there and be a helpful policeman. And then he called back shocked, right? Like, oh wow, this is really a high grade of cocaine. Now he has, and here's the humor. Now the police have to call the police because it wasn't his jurisdiction, right? Um, there was no humor in the nurse dropping the cocaine, but the other supported cast of that experience, I could find humor in. Or on my last show, I did a joke. And the joke was when actors portray uh, a disabled, no, when a not disabled actor portrays a disabled person, they're labeled brave. When a disabled person represents a disabled person, does that mean I get an Oscar? Right? Because that is the irony in our culture now.
I also want to ask you, you mentioned Michelle Buteau, who's sort of not liking a lot of comedians, but then thinking Michelle Buteau, who's amazing and who graced New Haven, I want to say 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago at the Festival of Arts and Ideas. Um, being hilarious and being someone whose work hopefully speaks to you a little bit. I feel like Mo Amer, if you know his work, is having a moment, and he's also sort of ridiculously funny because he talks about these deep social problems. And so I'm wondering who are some of the comedians who you look to when you're working on material, when you're looking for a laugh. We all need a laugh, I think, especially right now.
I think when I'm looking for a laugh, I look at Dave Chappelle, and Michelle Buteau. Um, as I said before, I was not a big comedian fan, right? Oh, I love D.L. Hewley, and we're gonna go see him tonight at Funny Bone. Um, but that is not how I process humor, right? I'm not thinking about what is funny because I don't know what's funny, right? I have like a weird sense of humor. right? So I have to try it out on people. But what I do know how to do, and I do it well, is to tell a story. And I think that the humor is in the honesty of the story. I'm not talking about what I did when I walked my dog because I don't have a dog and I can't walk. So my topics are unique in themselves. The other thing is, I did a joke about being a squirter and that my lover said that I was a squirter. Well, I didn't know what that was. Right? I'd never heard that before. But what I found interesting was that the audience totally freaked out because they were not prepared for the quadriplegic lady on a ventilator to talk about squirting, right? Because as a person with a disability, we're not persons.
Yes, this is so true. And this actually, I was going to ask you also about this because you're a very open book, or at least in my experience, you've been a very open book in talking about disability. And as someone who also has a disability, I find that often if you are in the spectrum of disability, whether it's someone who is neurodivergent or has a physical disability, there is like a separation where people just like assume either you are sexless or like that you don't have sex and that you don't have wants and desires and things that folks who are regarded as I like to say everyone's temporarily able-bodied because at some point in our lives I think everyone becomes disabled. Um, and there's this assumption that just like you're not going to talk about sex. And so for you also, do you feel like you have always had that openness in talking about disability, or did you feel called to be very open and very forthcoming after realizing like, hey, this is something that people around me they get squirmy when I'm open about this?
Well, I think people get squirmy, period, around me. Um, I did not know that I had a disability until I was in a wheelchair. Now, I walked with two leg braces and a beautiful cane, but I didn't know I had a disability because I did every single thing that I had done for nothing stopped me. And so maybe other people perceive that. And I'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? But when I became confined to a wheelchair, life became very different. And people automatically made assumptions. And then I realized, hey, I can't walk anymore. So it was not like, oh yeah, I'm a disability advocate. Not at all, because I don't even really know another person in a wheelchair. So I talk about, in general, how my life has unfolded. Now, a few years ago, quite a few years ago, I became involved with the National Organization of Disabilities out of New York. And I learned a lot about, you know, inroads that have been made in legislation, um, other people's perspectives, and that you can't lump everybody that has a different disability all in the same basket because it just doesn't work.
No, I think that's true. I got angry yesterday or 2 days ago because I saw an op-ed that said like opinion the disabled are a gift. And then it ended up being a beautiful op-ed, but I was like really heated about the title all day. Because I felt like there was this conflation of all folks with disabilities into this big monolith. And in the same way that like not all women are the same, not all queer folks are the same. Like you can't just say the disabled. And I'm wondering for folks who don't know if you can share here just a little bit of your story without it feeling like a spoiler for April 5th.
Because here's the thing, which story, right? Because I am an artist, right? I am a filmmaker. I am just getting my first novel release because I've written children's books. I am a daughter. I am a sister. I am a wife. Like, I am a person with a disability. I am a Black woman. It's like which hat did I wear? Do you want to talk about?
And like at which minute? Which hat did you wear in which minute? And well, I feel like you live at the intersection of all of those, right? Like all of those parts of you are alive. Maybe not. I don't know.
I tell you what, the intersection of race and gender and disability is just effed up because you never know which one is in action, right? The ism vortex, right? My God, my friend Thomas Levis, I first heard him say that term about 12 years ago, the ism vortex. And when that's working, you don't know what is going on. So I revert to the human vortex, right? That I'm a human being. And whatever foolishness that I'm encountering, that's how I'm going to deal with it. Because if I allow the label that you apply to me to become me, you won't.
Um, and also, how do you feel now that the show, I think it's like 2 weeks away. So this is for folks who don't know, it's the stand-up comedy
Freaking
show.
out.
Sorry?
Freaking out.
Freaking out. Oh no. You seem very like you have always struck me as extremely like confident, and I don't know if we're allowed to say the BADASS word on air because we're monitored by the FCC, but yeah, that's been my impression. So
Okay, well, I'm definitely a badass. Okay. But I've been writing new material. Lucy, you know this because you're a parent now. There's never enough time. There's never enough time to write, to practice, to be sick. I was in the St. Rayfield's emergency room last week. There's never enough time. And so I'm nervous, right? Because comedy, you have a live audience, right? So I love Bregano space. I love that theater space. And April 5th, when we chose the date, was 2 months ago. So now it's 2 weeks. I'm like, And then I'm like, you know what? We got this. Like everything else
Yes.
in life. Because comedy is not about perfection.
Yes.
It is actually about imperfection.
I love that.
The imperfection experiences of our lives.
I love that. I do want to ask, since I know we're running short on time and you asked me to keep it to 30 and we're
No, no,
beyond.
no. Go ahead. Take the time you need.
But I do want to ask, how do you're wearing so many hats. How do you also care for yourself?
I pray a lot, and I probably don't care for myself as well as I should.
I think that's true of a lot of women, especially a lot of Black women.
Yeah.
Um, Well, I'm also wondering, so folks can find out more about your show. We'll share information. It's at Brigamos Community Theater at 7 p.m. on April 5th, which is a Saturday for folks who don't know, now you know. Um, but also what do you hope that people know, or what are your dreamy dreams for your audience going into this?
Come with an open mind to look at yourself. Because that's what comedy does. It allows the audience to laugh at something, but also gives them the opportunity to look at their own thoughts around that particular subject matter.
And the last question I always ask folks is, is there anything that we specifically haven't talked about that you really want to get out there before this show?
You know, I start the day and the night with the words namaskar. And it's a Sanskrit word, which means the good or God within me. Honors the good or God within you. I think that is important. Whatever we're doing, that we bring from the well of love. We get to choose the well of love or the well of hate, right? And we get to choose. See, that's the key here. I choose to live from the well of love. And so I can't tell you what to expect, on April 5th at 7 o'clock at Reganos, community theater. Except that I'm going to be up there. And if nobody else is laughing, I'm going to be laughing, right? Because I'm up there. And the fact that I'm still alive is really funny. But, Lizzie, I give a shout out to the Arts Council, the Arts Paper, for surviving, right? Like, you guys have had to shift and cut down and change leadership, and that is what life is, right? People see me, they see Black woman quadriplegic. Uh, they might see somebody that just cussed them out. But what I see when I meet people are not these superficial assigned labels, but human beings. And my work, whether it's a film, The Deadliest Disease in America, and I'm going to ask you a question, Lucy. What is the deadliest disease in America?
Oh, I should know this because we've talked about it. Um, I know, I mean, for children, I know that guns have become the number one killer of, no.
The deadliest disease in America is racism,
Yes. Which in
and
New
it
Haven,
kills
yes,
more people than cancer and drive-bys because it is embedded in all of our systems.
that's right.
So it kills you by lack of education. And I'm not even going to talk about what has happened this week with our education system.
I love a good rant. And I feel,
Uh,
yes, I feel
but you
that.
know what? I'm not going to give them a good rant. I'm going to give them collective action. Because actually, collective action got us in this damn situation. So it has to be collective action that gets us out of that. Like I said, I start my day every day with a prayer of gratitude and thanks. And then I live my day. And my day is hard. It is really hard being a quadriplegic. But I'm blessed. I have a beautiful place to live. I have people that love me. I have heat when I need heat. I don't like air conditioning, but we do have it when we need it. I may not have a lot of food on my table, but I have food on my table. So when I think about crying about a bad day, I think of Gaza. And I go, don't dare, don't dare. But I want to make sure that every moment, everything that I create, that my work reflects the well of love. So this is what people can't accept the following. Go on April 5th at Bregamo's Community Theater at 7 p.m. You're going to find a well of love.
Thank you so much. I feel very moved. So thank you. I'm ready to laugh. I'm sure other folks are too. So stand up with comedian Crystal Emery, special guest Michael Mills. If you haven't met or heard Michael Mills by I don't know, probably you're living under a rock if you haven't met Michael Mills or Crystal Emery, but come out to Bregamos Community Theater on Saturday, April 5th at 7 p.m. Bregamos, if you don't know, is at 491 Blatchley Avenue in New Haven's Fairhaven neighborhood. Crystal, I want to thank you so much for joining me today on Arts Respond on WNHHLP 103.5 FM New Haven. We will share the event link under this interview on Facebook and Instagram. And as always, a huge thank you to Harry Droz, who makes this possible. Thanks, y'all. Have a beautiful weekend.
Okay, and you know what? You can join me on my website. Look, crystalrevery.org. No, .com. Yeah, crystalrevery.com.
Awesome.
All
Thank
right.
you, Crystal.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Bye.